welcome back. This is episode number 50 of Calibrated with Scott. We're just reaching milestones, and I'm having so much fun doing it. Thank you guys so much for your support. Everybody who subscribed, everybody who likes, donates, everything. I appreciate it so much. You guys make this possible. I want to do this all the time and just put out as much content as I can, and you guys are helping with that. So I really appreciate that. We have a beautiful episode 50 lined up. I don't know if you guys heard, but there was a coup attempt in Russia. Some people are saying coup attempt, some people are saying it was a coup, some people are, there's all kinds of misinformation and information flying around. It's hard to tell what exactly is going on, but we're going to dive into it today and really try to figure it out. So I'm going to take us back a little bit to when all of this kind of started. Wagner was present during the Battle of Popasnaya back in, I think, June of 2022. This was the first time we really saw Wagner in the SMO operating with the Russian military and making progress. They captured Popasnaya. That opened up the capture of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, which was a pretty big Russian win in the LPR, secured the whole of the LPR, and then the Russians started moving into the DPR, the Donetsk People's Republic. So from then, we started to get these rumors of infighting between Prigozhin and Grozmo and Shoigu. Basically the MOD. Prigozhin has always had issues with the MOD. He's been very vocal about it. He's been one of the few military leaders. Not a lot of the Russian military actually talks publicly. And, since he's not in the Russian military, but he's affiliated with them, he would get on Telegram and make statements, pretty inflammatory statements and stuff like that. But, he's trying to get things done. He's running a business. So you understand that kind of stuff. And then we got into the November months during the beginning of the Bakhmut operation, Soledar, Bakhmut. And this is where we really started to see this infighting sort of foment. Prigozhin was talking about how they didn't have any shells. There was a shell shortage. The MOD was, withholding shells from Wagner. And, I never saw any evidence of this. My opinion on this has been very clear. I don't think that there ever was a shell shortage. I think that Prigozhin was just trying to make himself look better, make the MOD look worse, normal businessman stuff. It's just kind of how politics and, they're generals. They're not soldiers on the front line. And Prigozhin isn't even a general. Prigozhin is the face of Wagner. He's not the military mind behind Wagner. He's just the owner. So this continued all the way through the Bakhmut operation, this back and forth between the MOD and Shoigu. On multiple occasions, he said he wasn't getting the proper ammunition, which was arguably, the evidence was not there for it. Wagner continued to progress. The Ukrainians never mentioned slowing down of firing. So I never bought into it, and I started to distrust Prigozhin the more and more things went on. The only thing I ever listened to him for was when he would capture a village, because he was always the last one to say anything about it, but he would have been the first one to know, considering, who he is and what intel he has. So this continued, and then Bakhmut wrapped up successfully for the Russians and Wagner. Wagner was then pulled back for rotation. And since then, the infighting and the inflammatory statements between the MOD and Prigozhin have escalated. They continued to escalate until about, I want to say 3 days ago, when Prigozhin actually led a small contingent of men. The Russian MOD says 8,000. I never saw 8,000 men. I never saw a convoy that would have been large enough to contain 8,000 men. At most, I saw 1,000 to 2,000 men in this whole event. I think it was probably like around a battalion of men that were left in Rostov, which was the city that Prigozhin actually first entered. He secured the city center, and he secured the Southern Military HQ without a fight. no fighting, nothing. The Russians just kind of let them walk in. And we'll get into the reasons why perhaps this happened. There could be multiple, but we'll get into that a little later. So after this, he secured Rostov, and then he immediately started driving a convoy to Moscow. I don't know if you guys know how far Rostov-Don is from Moscow, but it's right around 1,000 kilometers, I'm pretty sure. So this drive took 10 hours. During this whole event, the capture of Rostov and the convoy to Moscow, Wagner was reported to have shot down 7 aircraft, 6 helicopters, and 1 IL-22. I'm going to once again get into this later and really discuss some of the details about these attacks. But Prigozhin claims that they were defensive in nature. They were only firing when fired upon by aviation, Russian aviation. But an IL-22 is an unarmed plane. And then after this whole thing has happened, Prigozhin came out and said that it was an accident that this plane was shot down, and that he will be awarding the families of each victim of this crash 50 million rubles. So, you know, if you're looking at this as a whole, the entire coup, basically the only intentional casualties came out to 2. So 13 people died, 11 on the IL-22 reportedly. We don't actually have any photo or video evidence of that. We have one picture of a plane crashing with its engine on fire, kind of blurry, not dated, not geolocated. It's just, it's not that it didn't happen, but we just don't have the evidence like we have some of the evidence for the other aircraft that were lost. We do have a wreckage of a Ka-52 attack helicopter, and the wreckage of a Mi-8 that landed in a field, or that's what the Russians say happened. And apparently the crews lived. So after all of the fighting, it kind of died down, and the convoy just kept moving unabated all the way to Moscow. Both sides were making a big deal out of it. The Ukrainians were hopping on board. The West was hopping on board. And it just stopped at the outer rings of Moscow. Prigozhin, the convoy, it all just came to a halt. And then a couple hours later, we got word that a negotiated settlement had been reached between Putin, Lukashenko being the mediator, Lukashenko of Belarus, and Prigozhin. This whole thing was very weird. It gave me major Turkey coup vibes. It lasted all of a day or 2 days. It was completely unorganized. It was very small. It honestly was, it looked like it was made out to be a lot more theater than actual rebellion. And there could be multiple reasons for this. It could just be that, my particular perspective and my analyzing of this is not exactly correct. So I'm going to go down a bunch of different things that could have happened. And to start with, basically, coups don't last very long when they're not successful. From the start, they're usually shut down. You have 24 hours to get done what you needed to get done to overthrow the government or military or whoever you're trying to overthrow. Once that time passes, things become a lot more difficult. Prigozhin also went into this without the support of his own military commanders, without the support of any military commanders within Russia, without any political allies. And so, this whole thing just seems like either immense desperation from Prigozhin, which it very well could be, or a planned operation. And I hate to use the term psyop because I think people get the wrong idea when you use the word psyop, but I consider the Turkey coup that happened in 2016 to also be a psyop. All that did for Erdogan, which is that is the president of Turkey, was consolidate his power, and really no negative effects happened. The only thing he did was consolidate. I'm looking at the outcome of this, and I'm seeing sort of the same results. So, to start, Prigozhin is now said to be leaving for Belarus permanently, which if anybody doesn't know, Putin and Prigozhin are particularly close. They communicate regularly. They had a meeting 2 weeks ago that was, quote, productive. So, this whole thing felt odd from the start. I was very confused by it. It feels like something that could have been settled by a phone call. A lot of people are saying that this whole thing was over contract negotiations. Would PMC Wagner be rehired by the Russian MOD to continue operations? And how would that work? And at the end of the day, what ended up happening was the Wagner organization is now broken. The 8,000, quote unquote, 8,000 that the Russian MOD said participated in this event are going to be sent back to Ukraine, where they came out of. The Wagner organization that didn't go along with this coup attempt are now being incorporated into the Russian MOD. They're being offered contracts. So Wagner is now going to be a part of the Russian Ministry of Defense. That means that it really just depends on how you look at it, and this is very complex to talk about. But if Putin really did have a problem with Prigozhin, Putin's infighting and Prigozhin problems are now solved, and they were solved almost without blood. The helicopter losses are tough to deal with, but really, outside of the IL-22, losing one Ka-52 to secure and consolidate power and remove a thorn in your side is an absolute victory for Putin. There's the argument that this makes him look incredibly weak. I really don't see how that works, because he had a coup, he put it down, the SMO wasn't affected, the Russian economy wasn't affected, and now we're just back to square one. It's like this never even happened. It was so overly focused on and so overhyped by every single person in the information space, whether it be mainstream media, Russian and pro-Ukrainian telegrams, the Russian MOD, Prigozhin, it was just noise. You couldn't find any truth or any reality in it. It was just fakes and nonsense here and there. And, the real information just slips through the cracks. So the only thing we don't know about these negotiations is what is going to happen within the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. That was Prigozhin's whole point. When this whole thing wrapped up, they all seemed to be celebrating. I don't really know why. And that makes me think that maybe something will come out tomorrow on Monday. Putin's supposed to be having a meeting with senior military leadership, and that could result in staff changes. Staff changes are not necessarily uncommon, but after a coup, it could look like Putin is caving to Prigozhin's commands. But, here's the thing. If Putin wanted to get people out of the MOD, now he has an excuse. Now he can move people around. Nobody's going to be surprised. Nobody's going to be upset about it. And that could be a very real thing. There are people that get put into place that sour over time and you don't want them there anymore, but they're too influential to remove in a certain way. So this is where I start to go a little psyop-y with this whole thing. And I would really like to dive into how this could potentially be a psyop. And remember, this whole analysis is incomplete until Monday. Or whenever Putin comes out and announces the changes that have been made, if any are going to be made to the Russian Ministry of Defense. People are talking about General Surovikin becoming the General of Staff, and and a lot of things like that. So there's a lot going on. The first thing that makes me think this is a psyop is that there was no Russian response for days as this thing was building up. It takes time for Wagner to pull its equipment out of Ukraine. You know what? I forgot to mention Wagner in these convoys not only had trucks and Urals and stuff like that, but they also had some tanks, some anti-aircraft weapon systems, and a bunch of different stuff. So they pulled all of this out of Ukraine. They were moving it. Russian intelligence knew this was happening. There's no way. Putin knew probably 48 hours before this thing began that the Wagner organization something was going on, something fishy, something that you should at least be keeping your eye on. That's my number one red flag with this whole thing. My number two red flag is that you have a armed insurrection within your country from somebody who's openly calling your leadership a traitor and so on. And it was at most 8,000 guys without air support, without logistics, without political support. Everything you need for a coup, Prigozhin didn't have. He went for it anyway. And after all of that, you know, 2 casualties that were intended, potentially 13 total that 11 unintended, and Prigozhin is just going to walk away. The criminal case has been dropped against him. Apparently that was part of the negotiated settlement, and he has to move to Belarus or wherever. I mean, that's odd for a place that has always been talked about as pushing people out of windows and poisoning people, and just to let them go. That's very weird. And to reincorporate or send back the people who betrayed the country, that's also a huge red flag for me. That's not making a ton of sense. If he does get pushed out of a window in the near future, then we'll have further answers as to what happened. But as of right now, it seems like Prigozhin won, kind of, but for absolutely no reason. He didn't make it to Moscow. He didn't force anything. There could be the argument that the Russians were just trying to prevent bloodshed, so they didn't stop any of this. But they had hours. You can mine a highway and just stop traffic. And then what are they going to do? Go around it? You can set up cornets and knock these convoys out from kilometers away. They won't even see it coming. And that would stop traffic immediately, stop the convoy immediately for hours. There was no delay tactics. They just let it happen. They let Wagner continue for 900 kilometers, and then it just negotiated settlement. It's just all too clean. It wrapped up all too neat. It was so non-committal from both sides, and it just makes my gut turn. And I trust my gut, and I'm not going to go against my gut. The only aspect of this that makes it seem very real is the aircraft losses. I'm going to dive into them now because it's going to be important to talk about. So we had a Ka-52 where both pilots were reportedly killed. We don't have evidence that the pilots were killed, but I mean, it's a plane crash. The bodies are probably just removed. So that this one could potentially be true. We did see Wagner firing air defense missiles at a Ka-52 at different points throughout this. So that could definitely be a real thing. The IL-22, we don't have any real evidence for it. We have a plane that's, a picture of a plane that's falling out of the sky. I wouldn't say that that's concrete evidence. I'm not saying that this didn't happen. I have no idea. I just haven't seen it yet. So I'm going to put that one in the maybe for now. And the other 5 helicopters that crashed, apparently, 3 of them were electronic warfare helicopters, which we haven't seen a single picture of those. And that's 3 helicopters. You'd think we'd see a picture eventually. We did see one Mi-8 that was in a field, burned down. And I want you guys to look at this picture very closely. The props are intact. The boom is intact. There is no debris field. And there are tire tracks that lead to this helicopter. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I am not one to jump on a Psyop train or anything like that. But this is once again making my gut twist. I do not trust this whole situation. It's very odd. helicopters don't crash like this. If this thing was hit by an air defense missile and it made a very soft, perfect landing and then burned down, this is a potential possibility. But it's still it's just weird. Like the whole thing is weird. I've talked to people. One of my friends who's actually a helicopter pilot, has seen a lot of helicopter crashes. It's like his whole thing. He loves helicopters. He said that it looks completely wrong. It looks like somebody drug it out into the field and lit it on fire. And I have to concur. The tire tracks are not uniform with the other lines in the field. They lead directly to the spot where the helicopter was placed, in my opinion. It could have crashed. And when I say placed, I mean whether somebody perfectly landed it right where these tire tracks end and then it just caught on fire and burned up. Could be a possibility. Or it was towed out there and left and then burnt up to give the illusion that this actually occurred, that there was this fighting, that this infighting was real, that this coup was real, and that it was successfully stopped. The big winner of this whole thing, no matter what happens, is Lukashenko. He just came out and was the person who stopped a Russian civil war. That's what the West was calling it. So that is another that's just weird. I don't know Prigozhin and Lukashenko's history, but it's another win-win-win. Prigozhin gets out of his criminal liability charges and stuff like that. He will probably continue doing business, just not in Russia. Putin probably consolidated power, probably weeded out some issues with this whole thing. He may be making changes to the Russian Ministry of Defense. Those might be his own changes, or they could be changes forced through negotiation with Wagner. And he is now solved the major infighting issue. There won't be talks about infighting anymore. Prigozhin is done. If you think that this was real, Prigozhin's done. His reputation has been tarnished in Russia to the Russian people, and he just did not have the support he needed for this. The whole thing is just fishy, and it comes at a very odd time too. Prigozhin chose, I believe, one of the worst possible moments to do this, which is also making me incredibly suspicious. You're talking about Putin, who has been, to the Russian people at least, they've been seeing pictures of burning Leopards, burning Bradleys. The Russian military is clicking in the SMO. Things are working for them right now very well. All of that, you're looking at 19 plus days of offensive that has been a complete failure. So, forces aren't tied down. Things aren't going bad. If you did a coup when things were going bad, that would change this whole perspective for me, because coups when things are going bad generally succeed more often than coups when things are going good. He chose the absolute worst time to do this. And it once again makes me think that this was not a real operation, a real coup attempt. It just the chances of this succeeding, we didn't even see Lancets hitting the convoy. We didn't see really much aviation being used, like planes for bombing. They were traveling down a straight line for 9 hours. It's suspicious. I don't want to be the guy who's on here just talking about psyops and conspiracy theories and this and that, but if something does not make logical sense to me, I will investigate it and pursue it for a very long time, and that's what I'm going to do here. And the whole the last point is that during this whole thing, Prigozhin and the MOD had both come out and said that this coup is not affecting logistics or doesn't have anything to do with the SMO. The SMO will continue normally. That's not how coups work. If a coup is going on in your country, that interrupts things. It should not just be this pleasant, oh, we're going to surround the southern HQ building and we're going to push to Moscow and then we're going to stop and it's all going to be okay. It's weird. I can't put my finger on it. I need more information. I'm going to wait for more information, but it's weird. That's where I'm going to leave that. I wanted to give a quick frontline update. No changes. There's been some small changes around Bakhmut on the flanks, a couple 100 meters here or there, probably at the cost of multiple armored vehicles, potentially tanks, and thousands of men. The same in Zaporozhye, just more failed attacks. The Ukrainians have crossed the Dnieper River in Kherson near the Antonovsky Bridge, and they currently have a little forward operating post under the, I guess, the Russian bank bridge side, and they're just being hit with artillery under there. So that's a non-starter either. But, you know, we got a 1 day break from the counteroffensive. That's where everybody's attention switched, went to Russia, went to the internal issues, and, you know, the SMO just kept going. And as we come off of this, I think everybody's starting to realize that this wasn't what they thought it was going to be. You know, you saw maps like this from Ukraine battle maps. They were already starting to make you know, war maps for inside Russia, like they do for Ukraine, like, you know, territory captured, territory gained, territory lost, casualties, that sort of stuff. And right after it, you have Western mainstream media coming out, like Sky News, not the most honest people who will lie for Ukraine, hand over fist, you know, just not trustworthy news sources. And I don't trust this take, but they seem to be preparing their audience for things. And here you have this Sky News article saying that Prigozhin maybe that this whole thing was fishy, and that now during this whole event, you had massive force rotation from the Russians. You had Russian proper military moving around. You had Wagner moving around in great numbers. And, you know, the focus was all in one spot. I've said it before, the two ways to cover a potential offensive operation this day and age is through exercises or false flags. A false flag being a coup. I mean, you have this coup going on. It gives you unlimited permission to move everything around without drawing suspicion. It makes satellite work hard. You know, you have to look all over the place. You're looking at every single point of data. It can make things very confusing. And exercises, which, you know, I've talked about NATO finishing up their air exercises in Eastern Europe, could be a sign that they are positioning forces on the western border of Ukraine. And there's this feeling now that something is coming. Something is coming from the Russians. It all just got solved too soon. And you're also seeing the Ukrainians now continuing this narrative that the Russians are going to blow up the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which they control. And, you know, the Ukrainians haven't made a goddamn inch of progress on this offensive. So for the Russians to blow it, it would be the stupidest shoot yourself in the chest moment ever. I don't understand why they would do it. It makes absolutely no sense. And I implore you to think hypercritically about this and don't fall victim to trash propaganda. The Russians will not blow the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. They have no reason to. It's just a way to keep eyes on Ukraine. Or if they are absolutely out of their minds, they will do something to cause a radiological incident that would then invite them to come in and deal with it. Yeah, I hope that doesn't happen. And I'm glad that this coup wrapped up rather bloodlessly. You know, 13 people died. It's super unfortunate, but coups tend to be a lot worse than that. We'll see if there's any purges throughout the government or military throughout the coming weeks. That would be a sign that, you know, this might not have been a psyop, that this might have been something real. Time will tell. I just take a breath, analyze things properly, and figure it out over time. Other than that, I think we're done here. This has been episode 50 of Calibrated with Scott. I appreciate you guys so much. If you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, sharing. If you can share me and just get me spread around, that helps me more than anything else. Thank you guys. Have a great day.